Hey folks, we're going to get started in just a minute, but we're going to give everybody a chance to hop on quick. All right, should we go ahead and just get going and folks can join as they please? Work for you, Jess?
Sounds good.
All right, well, then, welcome everyone. We are really super glad that you're here tonight. My name is Emma Schmidt, and I am with Bold Alliance and the Iowa Easement Team. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that has been making quite a few headlines across the Midwest for nearly half a decade now, the Summit Carbon Pipeline. So, whether you've been following this project closely or you're just now kind of starting to hear about it, you're in the right place. This project has shifted dramatically from when it was originally proposed back in 2021. So, we're going to start with just kind of the basics and give you the full picture from there. And we are joined tonight by my wonderful, darling co host, Jessica Mazur. And so, Jess, if you would please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Emma. My name is Jess Mazur. I am a lifelong Iowan, graduated from Iowa State, and I have been working on agriculture and environment things and been working up at the Capitol for over a decade. And for the last 5 years, we've been working up at the Capitol and working with landowners all across the state to try and stop these carbon pipeline projects from happening. And I work with the Sierra Club Iowa chapter right now, and we're excited to be here because we are building a movement here to stop these carbon pipelines, and we need more people to be involved.
Excellent. So now everybody knows us, and we would like to know you too, hopefully. So if you want to, feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, who you are, where you live, why you're interested in this issue, your approximate wrist size, so we can all get matching friendship bracelets made, that sort of thing. But before we dive into all of the good stuff we're going to go over tonight, I do want to go over a few quick reminders. So first, I see we already have a question in the chat. We will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can either type them directly into the chat box or click the Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer them. Or if you're laying in bed tonight thinking about the best part of your day, which I naturally assume is going to be this webinar, and you come up with a question that you wish you would have asked, you can always reach out to Jess or myself. We'll put our emails in the chat for folks, but I do know there's a couple people on the phone, so if you would like to contact myself, you can always give me a call at 712-830-3748. Email is emma@boldalliance.org. And Jess's is jessica.mazur@sierraclub.org. Next, we just want to remind folks that the only reason that we are still standing against this project today is because we have allowed our unity to be way greater than our differences. I mean, not to point out the obvious here, but I personally, I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty hip and I'm pretty with it. And I'm willing to work with Jess, whose favorite hobbies include doing puzzles and watching Seinfeld reruns. And if I can handle that, I think we can all look past the things that divide us, whether it's politics, religion, economic status, or an affinity for 90s sitcoms. We are up against a multi-billion dollar industry that would love nothing more than for us to squabble ourselves into non-existence and just move on with our lives. But we haven't so far, and we won't because we care about the land, our neighbors, and our communities. And when you get a group of rather headstrong Iowans like us together, we are very, very hard to move. Our unity is our greatest asset, and no amount of corporate bullying, legal pressure, or divisive tactics can take that from us unless we let it. Now, let me step down off the pulpit there and share what is on tonight's agenda. If we go to the next slide, please, Jess. Amazing. So, like I said, we are going to start at the basics. We'll explain the purpose and the problems of carbon capture and storage. We'll cover Summit's latest changes to its proposed project. We'll go over what we have accomplished over the last few years and what we need to accomplish moving forward. And then we will still leave plenty of time at the end to hear your questions, comments, concerns, all that good stuff. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jess to break down carbon capture and storage for us.
Thank you, Emma. So one of the most important things to know about the carbon pipeline project is what is carbon capture and storage? What is CCS? So what is this whole thing that we're talking about? And carbon capture and storage is a proven to fail method of, capturing carbon and storing it somewhere or using it for something. It's a three-step process. So first they capture carbon dioxide at a industry facility. In our instance here in Iowa, it's at ethanol plants, but could be any other types of facilities like fertilizer plants or anything that emits CO2. So they capture it. They have to take it from a gas and they have to put it into a supercritical liquid to be able to transport it. And that means they put it under high pressures up to upwards of 2100 psi. They have to get all the water out of it. They can decontaminate it from any other substances that might be in the CO2. And then that all gets transported via pipeline to the third step, which is where they inject it underground for what they're calling permanent storage. Or what we're hearing of a lot more recently is a process called enhanced oil recovery or EOR. And rather than storing that CO2 underground, they're going to use it for something. And in North Dakota, we know that there's huge oil fields out there. And in order to get that last hard to get bit of oil out of the ground, you can pump CO2 in the ground to get oil out of the ground. And so that is what enhanced oil recovery is. And so Summit, when they started their project, did say that they are going to be a permanent sequestration project. And lately they're doing enhanced oil recovery. Again, this is a whole process that's all risk and no reward. Reward for the company, but not for us. It's proven to fail. It doesn't work to accomplish its goals, and it's really just a scam. And that's what the Summit Carbon Pipeline Project is all about. One of the biggest issues that you're going to hear in Iowa and beyond about why people are so opposed to the Summit Carbon Pipeline Project is property rights. And right now, Summit wants to use eminent domain on anyone's land who does not want it. On phase one, so Summit originally started their project back in 2021. On that original route, there are over 843 parcels that are refusing to sign easements. Summit has the right to file eminent domain over them. However, they have not pursued those condemnation proceedings yet. That's a huge number of people with eminent domain filed against them. And then Summit tried to expand. And so then there's what we call a phase two. And so when you add together all of these parcels that are unsigned and facing eminent domain, it's over 2,420 sub easements that are subject to eminent domain. That would be a record-setting use of eminent domain in Iowa. And we know that eminent domain does serve a purpose. It's for projects that are in the public interest, like roads and bridges and parks. But Summit's project is simply not that. It is a for-profit private project, and should not be allowed the use of eminent domain. Furthermore, if Iowa moves forward and allows this to happen, this is going to open up a Pandora's box in Iowa to allow any company that can claim some sort of economic benefit to be able to use eminent domain. We're already hearing threats of hydrogen pipelines and other types of pipelines, and we've even heard some say, data centers and eminent domain. We know that there's going to be a lot of companies looking to Iowa if they know that we do not have strong property rights laws here in the state. And so we need to start now because this Summit Carbon Pipeline might not affect your land, but the next one could. And so we have to stand strong at the beginning so we do not let that precedent get set. And bottom line, Iowans should have the right to say no over risky, dangerous carbon pipelines that are being proposed on their land. Back to you, Emma.
Alrighty, so one of the major topics that we hear about when discussing carbon pipelines are the risks. We know that carbon dioxide pipelines pose several hazards, but the most serious is the risk of a rupture and the subsequent CO2 release. So carbon dioxide is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It can lead to asphyxiation, dizziness, burns, confusion, brain injury, death. I sound like a pharmaceutical ad right now. I'm sorry. It's heavier than air and it can settle in low-lying areas. It can also stop combustion engines by displacing oxygen, which means that you may not be able to drive out of a plume of ruptured CO2, and emergency services may not be able to drive in to rescue you. And because carbon dioxide is transported through pipelines in a supercritical or liquid state, it's highly pressurized. So if a rupture occurs, that carbon dioxide is depressurized and it expands from that supercritical or liquid state to a gas form rapidly, which can just violently rip a pipeline apart for hundreds of feet. And that then releases all those tons of CO2 into the air. And ruptures, leaks, and other incidents have happened and they do happen often. If we go to the next slide, we'll see just how often. So over the past 20 years, there have been over 105 incidences that have occurred with carbon pipelines. And for reference, there's only about 5,000 miles of CO2 pipelines that currently exist in the United States. And Summit, a company that has never built or operated any kind of pipeline, has previously proposed over 1,000 miles of carbon pipeline in Iowa alone. And frankly, these 105 incidents they're just the ones that we know about, right? Because our government, love them, they rely on the industry to self-report. Not too long ago, actually, a carbon pipeline that goes from North Dakota up to Canada was discovered to have not reported three separate leaks over a 2 year period. So we know that the industry is not telling us everything that we need to know. We also know that the industry is constantly, it seems, trying to downplay the safety risks. So, for example, in Satarsha, Mississippi, when a carbon pipeline ruptured and it sent 49 people to the hospital and required hundreds of others to evacuate, the company blamed the very small amount of hydrogen sulfide in the pipeline for the health effects that people experience. It wasn't the carbon dioxide, it was the hydrogen sulfide, according to them. But funnily enough, we got a hold of the documents to see if there was any truth to that claim. And as it turns out, the company conducted 103 measurements of hydrogen sulfide concentrations throughout the day following the rupture, and they failed to detect any hydrogen sulfide using equipment that was spec'd to zero point 0.1 parts per million. While at the same time, the CO2 concentrations were about 28,000 parts per million. So suffice to say that if you are ever told that carbon dioxide pipelines are perfectly safe, I would say that you are well within your right to scoff at that.
Thank you, Emma. We're going to move on to another major concern from people across the state and across the country, and that is a lot of the land use and water use. These are resource intensive processes, and the water use alone for Summit's project in Iowa is equivalent to 440,000 people, almost 15% of Iowa's population. Now, these numbers have been adjusted with Summit's recent announcement that they are going to drop 200 miles of route. So this could be even more if they fail to actually drop that section of route, which Emma will talk about in a little bit. But they're going to use a lot of our water. And we know that in Iowa, we do not have strong laws to protect our water, our groundwater. And in Iowa, we've never done a comprehensive study to see how much water is down there, how quickly are we using it, and when is it going to run out. So we have to be really careful when we have a lot of different industries coming into our state and asking for massive amounts of water. And we know that carbon capture and storage is one of those massive water users. It also is going to use a lot of natural gas. So when these carbon pipeline companies claim that, this is going to be a project that helps with climate change, we know that that is not true when we know that they use a lot of natural gas to actually capture and decontaminate and to dehydrate and get the water out of the CO2. Plus, if they're doing enhanced oil recovery, but we know at the capture sites, it's equivalent to 1.8 million people, which is more than 56% of Iowa's population. So these are really heavy resource users. We also have talked a lot over the years about land destruction, which you can see in some of these photos. These are from the Dakota Access Pipeline fight before and after, or during and after construction. We know that construction of this magnitude for pipelines has a lot of problems with soil compaction, drainage issues, which you can see in this picture. Where these easements are, there's a lot of compaction. You can see exactly where it is. It probably have lower crop yields in those areas. You can see where water is settling and draining off. We have an entire webinar, which we can share with people who are interested on documenting the land destruction that happened from the Dakota Access Pipeline construction, and the rutting and the working in wet soils and everything. It's especially if you are someone that is along the route, a very good webinar to kind of see what this type of construction entails. Iowa State did a study of the easements along the Dakota Access Pipeline route, and they found a 15% loss for corn yields and a 25% loss for soybean yields. So we're talking significant damage to our soil. We know that these pipelines are going to cross rivers, so damage to banks and other water resources, a lot of use of our groundwater and of energy uses. So this is another reason that we should be concerned is we have to be careful about the resources that we have in the state when we're seeing so many different industries come in and try to expand and take advantage of our weak laws. So if you haven't found a reason that you are not a fan of these carbon pipeline projects will give you one more reason here. Why is all of this happening out of nowhere? It seems like before this project was announced, we hadn't even heard the word carbon capture and storage. Well, it's all happening is because there are some tax credits that are incredibly lucrative. And these industries, these companies purely exist to try to get the money from these tax credits before the tax credits run out. So the federal government is giving away our tax dollars, your tax dollars, to corporations who are utilizing carbon capture technology. There's two main tax credits, the 45Q and the 45Z tax credits. These tax credits are ripe for abuse. There's no effective monitoring on site to say how much CO2 is being captured. There's no standardized forms for IRS reporting. And, I don't think the IRS is very up to speed on carbon capture and storage to even know if some of those reporting numbers are accurate. So it's just a huge waste of our public tax dollars to line the pockets of people who are already wealthy. We have a lot of problems here in not only the state, but in the country. And I think there's better uses of our dollars than handing them over to companies like Summit, especially on an unproven technology that's taking a lot of land and a lot of our resources. So Emma, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right. If you are on the phone, I apologize for the next couple slides because they are maps and I cannot describe them in great enough detail for you to totally understand, but if you're unable to actually see the presentation, congrats, I guess. So as you can see, this is Summit's proposed route as it stands today. It's approximately 800 miles long with pipe size ranging from 6 to 24 inches. If built, the project would cross 32 counties throughout the state and connect to dozens of ethanol plants. However, I would not take anything on this map to be set in stone. For example, we're currently hearing that Summit is intending to change the end destination of its pipeline. So instead of heading for North Dakota like they originally proposed, the pipeline would instead cross the entirety of Nebraska and end up in Wyoming. And while that is like definitely a possibility and enough of a possibility that I would say our neighbors in Nebraska need to be concerned, prepared, and ready for it, it's also clear that the Dakotas still have a target on their back. If you look at the northwest corner of this map, the proposed route still clearly enters into South Dakota. There isn't an ethanol plant in Lyon County, so that section of pipeline serves no purpose other than as an access point into South Dakota. And yet Summit has announced that that section is off the off the table. If we go to the next slide, we can see that this is the route that Summit has been proposing since like 2024. The blue lines are the segments that Summit just recently announced that they will drop, which amounts to around 200 miles. However, they have not actually taken any official steps to do so. They have not withdrawn their eminent domain rights over any of the parcels. They've not closed any of the Iowa Utilities Commission permitting dockets. So we're basically just basing this off of their word. And personally, just me, I would honestly trust gas station sushi more than I would trust anything Summit has to say. But if we go to the next slide, let's go ahead and just live in a fantasy land for a second because I've received quite a few phone calls from landowners that are asking if they're still being targeted for Summit's pipeline. And now, my answer is always going to be yes, you are targeted, whether you are currently on the proposed route, you're on an older route, you're a neighbor to the route. If you have land anywhere in the state, essentially, you are a potential target. Summit has made it clear that if they do get their base project in the ground, future expansion is an option on the table. So the way I see it is we all have skin in this game, regardless of whether or not a land agent is knocking down our door today, because they could very well show up tomorrow. And it's not just limited to carbon pipelines, like Jess was mentioning earlier. If we don't uphold our rights today, right now, we are setting out a welcome mat for other industries, whether it's hydrogen, data centers, transmission lines, you name it. But if we get off my soapbox and back into Fantasyland, under Summit's currently announced, but again, unofficial route, these sections of pipe in Sioux County, so west of Siouxland Energy, going into South Dakota, and Dickinson County, north of the Superior ethanol plant, going into Minnesota, would be abandoned. Each of those squares that you see on the maps along the route are the unsigned parcels. So Summit still has eminent domain authority over the yellow parcels, until they rescind it, assuming they'll rescind it. But they do not have eminent domain over any of the blue parcel squares. If we go to the next slide, these maps a little bit harder to see. I'm sorry about that, but it's the same concept. So on the left, you can see the route that was proposed for Shelby, Pottawatomie, Montgomery, Page, Fremont, Adams counties, and they're supposedly, again, going to be taken out of the equation in the near future. And the same can be said um, for the map on the right, where Summit claims the route in Mitchell, Worth, and part of Floyd will not be pursued for the time being. But again, I would not bet the farm on this being a long-term situation because they have, made it very clear that the future expansion options are, on the table. So hopefully now you kind of have a better idea of where Summit is at, but let's go ahead and talk about how we have spent the last 5 years challenging this inane project every step of the way. So I'm guessing everyone here understands that Summit is no stranger to the legal system, whether they're sending cease and desist letters to opponents of the project or suing nearly 300 landowners and numerous counties. There have been just an endless number of legal fights regarding this project. And I know this was mentioned in the chat, like first thing when we got started, but one that I did not mention in this slide, but that did take place earlier in this week was a case in Delaware where Summit was being sued for $15 million because they seemingly attempted to renege on a contract with a pipe manufacturer. We have not heard the results of that case just yet, but we are actively digging into it and trying to get answers. So we'll be sure to share it with you once we know what happened. But I'm going to give you a quick overview of several of the major cases that have taken place. Just know that this is definitely like a high level overview because it would take probably like a 3 month long seminar to go over every legal action that has been taken. So if we look at South Dakota, landowners took their concerns about survey access and Summit's common carrier claim to the state Supreme Court. And as a result, in a major win, pipeline companies can no longer do invasive surveys without landowner permission in South Dakota. If we go over to North Dakota, landowners have challenged the legality of Summit's pipeline permit and the law that granted them a permit to store carbon underground. Oral arguments for the appeal of that pipeline permit are actually coming up next month on July 14th. My opinion, landowners have a pretty strong, although slightly technical case, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Although, going back to what we've been saying, maybe it's just me, but it does seem a little odd that a company that claims, North Dakota is no longer the end destination for its pipeline, a little odd that they're continuing to fight to keep the North Dakota pipeline permit. What do you know? But I honestly don't know any other way to interpret all of the clues that they've put out regarding the maps and the court cases and everything beyond that Summit is clearly trying to keep its options open. And I will just say that it seems to me that the Dakotas still pretty clearly have a target on their back. When it comes to the carbon storage site in North Dakota, landowners have actually won several cases. Most recently, I want to say back in March, the courts ruled that the state's law around carbon sequestration allowed for an unconstitutional taking and ended up reversing Summit's carbon injection permits. This ruling does have ripple effects beyond just Summit, so I expect that we probably need to keep our eye on the North Dakota legislature come January to ensure that property rights, both surface and subsurface, are upheld and protected. And then finally, in Iowa, the legal efforts have fallen into three main buckets, I'd say. So we have surveys, ordinances, and permitting. Like in South Dakota, an Iowa landowner challenged the legality of Summit surveys. Under Iowa law, a pipeline company has the right to survey your land with or without permission. The company, all they have to do is notify the landowner via restricted certified mail, along with the tenant, just saying, hey, we're going to come survey in the next 10 days. And you have no say in the matter. In this instance, neither the landowner nor his tenant were properly notified, and the case went all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the court essentially said, sorry, landowner, too bad, so sad, and gave Summit a pass. Now, when it comes to ordinances, that battle was between Summit and Iowa counties. Numerous counties have attempted to enact zoning ordinances to ensure just the growth and the safety of their communities and ensuring that they're going to be protected from any risky carbon pipelines. Summit filed lawsuits against several counties, including Shelby and Story counties. Summit's argument there was essentially that any local efforts regarding pipeline safety is preempted by federal law. So basically, even though carbon pipelines are severely underregulated, local governments can do nothing about it. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals ultimately sided with Summit, creating a split ruling with the Fifth Circuit Court. And we actually tried to get the United States Supreme Court to take it up, but they did not decide to take up the case. But that doesn't mean it couldn't come up someday. Summit also filed similar lawsuits against Emmett, Bremer, and Palo Alto, which have all been settled and dismissed like just within the last few months. And then Kossuth County's lawsuit is currently stayed, but the supervisors have been ordered to repeal the ordinance that they put into place. However, all of that does not mean that counties cannot pass ordinances. It simply set boundaries on how an ordinance can address carbon pipelines. So if you hear them say that, you know, the courts have said that ordinances can't happen, not true. Absolutely not. You can still pass ordinances. You just have to be a little bit more specific on what it contains. And then, last but not least, landowners have an ongoing case appealing the pipeline permit and the eminent domain authority that was granted to Summit by the Iowa Utilities Commission for approximately 700 miles of the proposed route. So, last year, the district court remanded the case back to the Iowa Utilities Commission. And Jess is going to talk a little bit more about this, I think, but basically we are at the point where we're just waiting on that remand proceeding to move forward before it can go back to district court and likely then the Iowa Supreme Court to be decided on. I know that was a lot, and frankly, it was basically just the tip of the iceberg, but I am going to hand it over to Jess to share some of the other things that we've been, other ways that we've been fighting to protect our land and our rights since this summit project was announced. Take it away, Jess.
And we could easily have a part two to that seminar just on organizing and other things that we have done. But we're going to just cover some of the real big things that we've been working on over the last 5 years. And a lot of them is to do with just, down and dirty organizing, getting people together who agree that, it is worth fighting to stop this carbon pipeline and working together despite our differences. Like Emma said earlier, unity has been our biggest gift in this fight. Despite our differences, whether we're rural or urban or young or old or Republican or Democrat, we've been working together because we all agree that there are so many things wrong with this project that we have to work together. One of the big things that we recognize from the very beginning of this project is that if each landowner, goes in on their own and hires their own attorney, or maybe doesn't hire an attorney, then you have a lot of different strategies competing with each other. And a lot of people might not have the means or the will to go out and seek and do all that work with an attorney. So we decided that we should follow a model that's worked in other pipeline fights in the past, and that's a legal co-op. So we started the Iowa Easement Team, which is a group of landowners that are targeted by either Navigator, Wolf, or Summit, now just Summit. And these landowners are pooling their money together to work with an attorney, Brian Jordy, with the Domina Law Group. And they're the Iowa Easement Team. And they've been doing a lot of things with the legal aspects of the case. And anyone can support or join the Iowa Easement Team, even if you're not an impacted landowner, if you just want to help pool the efforts for the legal co-op. Another thing that all of the people that have been involved in this over the last 5 years have been working on is the Iowa Utilities Commission. The Iowa Utilities Commission is essentially like a court, and they are keeping track of everything that has to do with this project from day one to now. And so we have been doing lots of things like filing objections or essentially public comments in the docket and organizing people to file them together around the same time so we can echo certain demands or certain points that we want to make. We've even worked together to file motions. It's one of the reasons that we've gotten a lot of information from Summit when we're filing motions for information. We also are using that to try to point out where things are wrong, like not having access to landowner lists at the very beginning. We used the docket to point that out. So the Iowa Utilities Commission, they have a monthly meeting. We attend it every single month. They did stop those monthly meetings for about a year when they had a not so good chair of the board. But those are continuing, and it's something that anyone can come to every single month. They're usually the third Wednesday of every single month at 1 p.m., but over the summer they have been switching that up. The next one for July is going to be July 13th at 9 a.m. at the Iowa Utilities Commission office, and we can share that information with folks later. But that has been, a really strong portion of our work is working with the Iowa Utilities Commission to make sure that this process is fair and transparent, and that we are adamant that this is going to take as long as it takes to do it right. We're not rushing anything through for the well-being of Summit. Like Emma mentioned earlier, we've been doing a lot of work at the county level. It started out with just trying to get counties to officially object, just saying that we are opposed to this project coming through. We were able to get 46 out of 99 counties in Iowa to weigh in formally with the Iowa Utilities Commission and file objections with the state. We were able to get 11 counties to pass those zoning ordinances that Emma spoke about a little while ago. And then we now have 6 counties that have passed, good right-of-way ordinances or road crossing ordinances. And these give strong county protections for any time a project like Summit would propose to cross a public road or right-of-way. So we're doing a lot of work at the county level, and that's really paid off because, there are county supervisors all across the state that are joining in the fight. So it's not just us alone. It is people who are elected to office to serve their counties that are engaged in the Iowa Utilities Commission process and are engaged at the local level as well. We have been working at the Capitol relentlessly for 5 years. We have a landowner lobby team that's up there every single week, and we are well known at the Capitol now. We are a recognizable force up there. Sometimes they call us the red shirts because we always wear red to make sure they know that the landowners and people who care about property rights and the carbon pipeline projects are there at the Capitol. We've had bills introduced every single year for the last 5 years. And in 2025, that's where we got the farthest along during the legislative session. We had a bill, was not our preferred favorite bill, but we had a bill that would have improved the situation we're in, get through not only the House, but also the Senate, which is our huge challenge to get a bill through the Senate. We did that by building really strong relationships with a key group of senators, and we need to grow that group of senators if we're going to continue working on legislation. But we were in 2025 able to get it through the Senate, and Governor Reynolds vetoed the bill, so it did not go into law. We do have regular meetings with leadership in both chambers. And in 2026, this last session, we finally got our ideal bill introduced into the Capitol. And that's what we're going to be working on again in 2027, which we'll tell you about in a little bit. But bottom line is we have been trying anything and everything. We've been organizing events at RAGBRAI. We've been showing up at county fairs, and you name it. We've been trying a little bit of everything to make sure that we leave no stone unturned and, to try to see which strategies are actually going to work. Another thing with the Iowa Utilities Commission, they have monthly meetings, like we said, and there are some important things that are in front of them right now. So since Summit is having a lot of problems in South Dakota with the bill that they passed that eliminated the use of eminent domain for carbon pipelines, they've really been trying to figure out how in the world are they going to get this project through. So they have filed quite a few change requests. They've filed some amendments like changing those routes that Emma talked about a little while ago. They're asking to consolidate all of their dockets, which is, their original route and their expansion routes all together into one. They're asking for these hearings to be fast tracked so people don't have time to put up a strong legal fight throughout the Iowa Utilities Commission hearing process. And so they're trying to file a lot of changes with the Iowa Utilities Commission. At the same time that they're trying to make those changes, we have been appealing their original route, or what we call the Phase 1 permit. And then South Dakota passed their law that banned eminent domain for carbon pipelines. And Summit said, hey, District Court, there's been a big change in South Dakota. And we would like to send this case back to the IUC so that they can look at the changes in South Dakota and how it affects our permit. And then we can go back to the courts to appeal the permit. And we fought that, but the judge did remand the Phase 1 case back to the IUC. So I know that's really confusing, but right now the IUC has a lot of things to decide. They have to decide whether they're going to let Summit make amendments, consolidate, and fast track. And even more importantly, they have to figure out what are they allowed to consider based on what the judge said. The judge said, sure, we will send this case back to you, and you have to make your decision based solely on how did South Dakota's bill affect your permit? And we are saying that that should be limited to just that and not expanded to all of these other changes that Summit is trying to make. So hopefully that makes it a little more understandable of what we're waiting on with the IUC right now. We've been waiting for about 6 months for IUC to make a decision. We've been making filings in the docket. Summit and their allies have also been filing in the docket. And then the other thing we're kind of waiting on with the Iowa Utilities Commission is, so Phase 1's up in the air, back and forth between the courts and the IUC, but all of the folks on those expansion routes, or what we call Phase 2 routes, they're still basically at the very beginning of the process. And they're going to have a long road ahead of them as they go through the Iowa Utilities Commission process to put up their case as to why eminent domain should not be granted for those sections of the route. Summit wants to fast track that, and they want to clump it in with phase one, which really takes away some of the rights of those phase two landowners. So this whole IUC process is a mess right now. And we are very lucky that we have some really strong legal parties that are involved in the case to keep everything straight and to hold Summit accountable for a fair process. Um, the parties that are engaged in the Iowa Utilities Commission process are what we call the Iowa easement team, or the Geordie landowners. Those are the impacted landowners who've hired Brian Geordie. We have a group of county supervisors who have all hired an attorney named Tim Whipple, and he represents county supervisors. There is an attorney representing a group of legislators, and there's about, I want to say, 39-ish legislators that are part of the Republican Legislator Interveners for Justice. They're a party to the case. And then there are a few other key parties as well. So we're going to be looking to them as they kind of clean up this mess. IUC has been labeled in the past as kind of a kangaroo court, so it has always been a mess on this case because they're really having to justify approval of something that we clearly know is really, really wrong. So we'll keep you updated. It's really important that people stay involved in the Iowa Utilities Commission process. Even though it's complicated, if you stay involved, we'll make it really easy and we'll tell you what to file as a public comment when, and what we're asking the Iowa Utilities Commission to do. All right, next thing is looking ahead. So we've kind of talked about all the different things we've tried, but we also have an idea of where we're going. We can't just be driving this blindly. We are planning ahead. And the big thing that we know that is critically important, South Dakota did it, and it is what Iowa needs to do next. It is passing our bill through the legislature in 2027. The language that you see on the screen, this is the bill. This is all it is. It's one sentence. It's clean, it's simple, and it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, a person shall not exercise the power of eminent domain to acquire right of way for, construct, or operate a pipeline for the primary purpose of transporting carbon oxide. This bill does exactly what we need it to do. It is vetted by multiple attorneys. It passed the House 2 sessions in a row. So we know that this is good language and this is what we need to be working on. Our challenge in 2027 is going to be, again, to get the bill through the Senate. Senate leadership is not on our side. Senator Klemesh is the Senate Majority Leader, and it's very clear that he is pro-Summit and pro-pipeline. And he's trying to distract the public with fake solutions. And so if you hear words like corridor or we need to make sure we're protecting all different kinds of industries, then you need to have a red flag that that is just an excuse to not focus on the language that's in front of them and the bill that's on the screen in front of you. We already have the solution, Senator Klemesh and Senate leadership. We do not need them to rewrite another bill. We need them to pass this bill. And then we need to get it to the governor's desk and make sure this time it is signed. There's a good chance that 2027 will be our last legislative session. We've said that for a few years now, and we've managed to squeeze out a few more legislative sessions with some really good organizing on the ground with legal efforts and with county efforts. But we have to get serious about making sure we get this legislation through in 2027. Back to you, Emma.
All right, so just made it pretty clear that we know we need to pass legislation. And to do that, we need to elect better officials, right? But there is just a slight problem there. We're dealing with politicians, right? And I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, so you might want to sit down for this. But politicians, not all of them, but a lot of them, they're actually known for lying. I know, a lot to take in. So that means even if they say to you, absolutely, I hate eminent domain, frankly, that really doesn't mean anything. They can talk the talk all they want, but we need to demand that they walk the walk. So we came up with a few questions that provide, I would say, a bit of a litmus test for candidates to see if they're just saying what we want to hear or if they firmly believe in fighting for their constituents. At the same time, we can use these answers to hold them accountable if they are elected. So if you run into them at, a parade, a town hall, or if you just want to shoot them an email or give them a call, here are 3 questions that we think folks should be posing to candidates. First is, do you support legislation prohibiting eminent domain for carbon pipelines? Second is, do you support counties having the right to enact ordinances for carbon pipelines? And then finally, will you intervene with the Iowa Utility Commission's permitting process? Now, this is not an end all be all list by any means, but it is a starting point. And there are other things that they can do to prove that they are with us. Candidates can submit objections to the Iowa Utilities Commission. They can make sure protecting property rights and ending the abuse of eminent domain is a key component of their campaign platform and is, prominently displayed on their website and on their social media. They can refuse donations from industry interests. They can also show up to IUC meetings and submit letters to the editor like the rest of us are doing. There's no shortage of things that they can and should be doing to earn our votes. And we will actually, in some follow up, we'll go ahead and share like a form. So if you do talk to a candidate, you can help share what they said about these issues and if they answer these questions. That way we can help get the word out that, like, hey, this guy seems to be on our side. This gal seems to be on our side. This loser over here, we hate him, that sort of thing. But we will get that shared around after tonight. If we want to go to the next slide, Jess. All right, so everything we've said so far sounds great, right? We need to get candidates on the record, we need to pass legislation, yada, yada, yada. But none of that is possible if we don't use our political power, and that is our votes. And that's what this all really comes down to. Our vote is our voice. So we can show up at the Capitol every week. We can take over public comment periods at the Iowa Utilities Commission. We can file lawsuits. But none of that will do us any good if we cannot get the right people into elected office. We cannot win this fight without real leaders that are ready and willing to stand up and put Iowa values before corporate profits. Now, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for because A, that's your decision, and B, none of my business. But everything I said earlier about unity and looking past differences, that very well may wind up applying at the ballot box too. There is no party, Democrat or Republican, that has been as strong on this issue as we need them to be. Folks have got to stop being divided by party. So if you're willing to vote for the best candidate on this issue, regardless if they're, Republican, Libertarian, Democrat, Independent, whatever, we urge you to take this pledge to be a property rights voter. I think Jess is going to share the screen so you can actually see what the pledge looks like, but it's very simple. And it basically just says, I pledge to be a property rights voter. Iowa's elected officials were sent to Des Moines to represent the people of this state, not the interests of multi-billion-dollar corporations. Too many of our so-called leaders have failed that responsibility. I commit to making property rights a defining issue in every election, to supporting candidates who will prohibit eminent domain for risky carbon pipelines, and to holding every office holder accountable to the Iowans whose land, livelihoods, and futures are on the line. So if that sounds like something you'd be willing to sign, we will put, oh, Jess already did it. She put the link in the chat. We would certainly appreciate you signing. That way we can start forming a cohesive team that is ready to take over these elections and ensure that we are able to get legislation passed next session, to ensure that we are electing people that are the real deal and not just, talking the talk. I think that's just about it on that slide. Jess, you want to take us back to the presentation? Beautiful. Oh, actually, I should say too, if you want a sign, a yard sign that says I'm a property rights voter, let us know because we will share it with you. We will happily, I think we have 500 of them to give out. So let us know.
All right. Thank you very much, Emma. So looking ahead, what are we kind of expecting? Well, there are so many different things that we can do every single day. We can file objections with the Iowa Utilities Commission, which we'll share with you how you can do that. We can intervene, and that means anyone who's interested in participating in the IUC hearing at a higher level, you can intervene. We definitely encourage anyone that lives near the route or is on the route to intervene, but anyone can do it. You yourself, as an individual, you can have supervisors intervene, you can have legislators intervene, anyone can intervene. We need to work with our counties to push them to pass those right-of-way ordinances to protect road crossings. We need to lobby and attend candidate events that are coming up over the next 6 months or so until November. Like Emma said, we have yard signs to hand out. We're going to be at 2 different places on the Ragbri route, near Erling in Shelby County and near Guthrie Center in Guthrie County. And we also have a weekly newsletter that we send out to give people updates on the regular. So if you want to get involved with that, make sure that you put your information on that pledge so that we can stay in contact with you. Letters to the editor are really important, and simply voting in November is really important. All of that is important because Summit is determined to push this project through. They've shown us now they're not giving up. Originally, at the very beginning of this, three carbon pipelines were proposed in the state, and we out-organized Navigator and Wolf. Summit has a big entitlement problem. Bruce Rastetter, the head of Summit, is an Iowan, and he has a lot of political power through donations to candidates, not only in Iowa, but beyond. And he thinks that is you kind of a guarantee that he can get what he wants. He thinks he can buy our government and our politicians to ensure his project's going to go through. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to know that, like what Summit's done in the last 5 years, there's always twists and turns, and they could expand. They could hook up to different facilities. They could reroute. They could surprise us and go a completely different direction because we really don't know where they're going and what they're doing. They have a pipeline to nowhere. They're saying that they're going to Wyoming to do enhanced oil recovery, yet they're not publishing any of that information publicly or in the docket with the Iowa Utilities Commission. They're just saying that in the news. And we're also noticing that they're not dropping any of the sections that go up to the Dakotas. We know that they're still working on those lawsuits in North Dakota. So we really don't know where they're going or what they're doing. And how in the world can Iowa and the Iowa Utilities Commission give approval for a project that doesn't know where it's going and what's going to happen with the product that they're transporting? That is not doing its due diligence. It's not doing its service to Iowa. So we have to be engaged in this process to make sure that Summit doesn't get its way. Because if we step away and don't watch and don't show up and don't weigh in, these politicians are likely to side with Summit. Another thing to remember is that as this goes on, we know that Summit is likely becoming strapped with cash. These investors who put all the money up to start this project 5 years ago were told that the project would likely be up and running in 2024. Well, here we are in 2026, and it is far from that point. So every single thing that we do is critically important. Every time we put up another roadblock, and every time we get another group of people to object or to go to the Capitol or to weigh in with their local supervisors, it is another roadblock that Summit's investors are seeing and questioning, should I keep putting money into this project? This is a monumental fight of David versus Goliath. It's precedent setting. This project is going to impact every single Iowan, if not now, but in the future, because property rights are going to be allowed to be taken away by any company, whether they're for profit or not, that just says we have an economic advantage or an economic benefit for the state. And don't wait to get involved. One thing that we heard from some landowner, a landowner that was in Greene County, he watched his neighbors fight the Dakota Access Pipeline. It wasn't crossing his land, but he watched them fight, and he was kind of rooting them on from the sidelines and behind the scenes. And he wishes now he would have gotten involved. He wishes he would have helped his neighbors because now it's at his door. And he's hoping that his neighbors are going to help him. So don't wait. It is incredibly important that we're united. And whether we're impacted or not, whether we agree with every single thing that our neighbor agrees with, it's important that we remain united because we are together on the fact that this is an abuse of property rights. This is dangerous. This is going to waste our public resources and not just water and electricity, but our public money. This is a bad thing for Iowa, and Summit's going to keep pushing to do this. They're going to keep changing the reason that we need their pipeline. It went from we need this for climate change to we need this for sustainable aviation fuel to now we need it for enhanced oil recovery. So this is going to keep changing, and we have to be ready to pop up like that whack-a-mole thing. Every time Summit pops up, we have to be ready to shut them down. The other thing that we're hearing Summit try to do, and we're keeping an eye on stuff at the federal level, but we have heard whispers of if they can't get eminent domain in the states, then maybe they can try to get federal eminent domain. And so that's something we're going to keep our eye on. But Summit's determined to do this one way or another, but they're underestimating the power of Iowans and Midwesterners when we unite. This isn't just happening in Iowa, it's happening and spreading across the country. And if we continue to work together and we can continue to say no and organize and stay united, then we can keep these projects out of our backyards, out of our neighbors' backyards, and out of the United States. So I'm going to pass it over to Emma.
No, you're not. You're passing it over to everybody because now it's time for questions. So I know we do have a few that have already come in. If you want to come off of mute, you're totally able to raise your hand and we can call on you, I think. Otherwise, go ahead if you have any questions that you haven't asked so far. pop them in the chat, put them in the Q&A box. Um, I did try and get a few from the chat. So the first one is, what has the IUC said, if anything, about Summit's new route? Do you expect the IUC to weigh in?
So Summit has filed an intent to withdraw the 200 miles of route that Emma showed you in those screens earlier, but that's all they've filed. They have not filed any withdrawal of Exhibit H. Exhibit H means that parcel is threatened with eminent domain, and they have not done that for any of those sections of route. So it's still just, a statement with no actual teeth behind it. The Iowa Utilities Commission, there's actually some interesting filings in the past week about how this withdrawal affects all of these other changes that Summit is asking for. And a lot of the attorneys are basically coming to the conclusion that Summit has created a mess. And they're asking for all of these things when really we're supposed to be focused on one thing. And so that's something we can share in a follow-up email of these recent filings about how withdrawal would impact how the Iowa Utilities Commission to move forward, how they intend to move forward. But as of right now, they haven't filed anything other than just an intent to do it. And at the same time, they've spent a lot of work filing new Exhibit H's on a lot of landowners that are on the route headed into Nebraska, trying to change that pipe size from 12 to 24 inches. And so while Summit is filing eminent domain on a bunch of new people, they haven't withdrawn it on all these people that they're saying they will.
Beautiful answer. The next one was from Heather, who said, not to mention how these companies treat people. Ever heard of Tiger Swan? Yes, we have. Jess, do you want to go in a little bit more detail about what Tiger Swan is?
Yes. So pipeline companies are infamous for hiring private security to do some of their dirty work, to try to get intel, kind of intimidate people. And for the Dakota Access Pipeline, the company, their preferred security company was Tiger Swan. And Summit actually has a completely different preferred security company that they've been using. And the name is escaping me right now. And what we dealt with them quite a bit during the hearing where they were actually taking pictures of Emma's car and license plates, and they were frisking us and had bomb dogs while we were trying to go into the Iowa Utilities Commission meetings.
I keep waiting for
Um,
that name to pop into my head and I'm just blanking on it. But yeah, so suffice to say, like, we know that there is definitely risks that come with being an outspoken opponent to multi-billion dollar projects. And
yeah.
I'm sure Heather could tell us plenty more because I know she's had plenty of experience with uh
Well, and I
with
think
the
it
Tiger
actually brings
Swan.
up another point of just if curious how Summit behaves with people. Anyone that speaks out against them, they don't like it, whether you're telling the truth or not. And there have been, I think, about 8 or 10 people in Iowa that have received cease and desist letters from Summit trying to get us to stop organizing against their project. They never followed up on them because they know we're not doing anything illegal. But it is the tactics that these companies use are dirty. They're not the type of companies we want to be doing business with.
Overwatch security. The chat helped us out there.
Overwatch. Yep, that is Summit's preferred security.
Yep. One other thing I wanted to note from the chat is somebody mentioned that Kasuth just repealed their setback ordinances. And so, yeah, I mentioned that when talking about all of the litigation. Basically, they still have to file like a status report with the courts to be able to get that case so it's no longer stayed. And they have not done that. I think they have until like the 22nd. So once that happens, then I imagine we'll see that case closed. But um, next question, per South Dakota, did the latest primary elections have any impact on the battle there? I know the godfather of South Dakota, old Ed Fishbach. I saw his name on there when folks were introducing themselves. So he probably has a better um, just summary of this than I do. But so Ed, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong at any point. But basically, from my understanding in South Dakota, is that the elections were wonderful. They could have been much worse. I would probably call them better than Iowa's primary personally, but it's just very clear that we cannot just drop the ball on anything because Summit is going to continue pushing. And if I'm sure they have the opportunity to overturn the South Dakota law that prohibits eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, they surely will. And I'm sure that is why they're still continuing to look at a route through South Dakota because they think they can overturn that law. And so it is just critically important that whether you're in South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, wherever, you are making sure to use your voice when you vote to ensure that we're not electing just anybody that will let this project slide on through without any sort of opposition, because I think that is a very real fear. But as long as people stay united, you know, we're golden. I just see a follow up. The primary runoff in South Dakota governor. Is there a problem with either candidate? So the two candidates, Toby Doden and Governor Larry Roden. Larry Roden is actually the one who signed the eminent domain bill into law, but I don't think he did it like super happily. He's pretty waffly on this issue. And I know Toby has been a strong proponent of property rights. So, I mean, I will not tell you how to vote, but just know that, we have seen Toby at CO2 pipeline events and that sort of thing, and he seems to be pretty strong on this issue. Whereas good old Larry, he did sign our bill, but it was not, an easy thing to have happen. So we'll see there. But hey, at least they didn't get Dusty Johnson. That would have been a nightmare. So finger snaps for that. Um, Next question we have is, will you make a recording of this presentation available? Absolutely. Um, and then I have one more from the chat, and then we can move over to the ones that came in through the Q&A. Has anyone estimated the amount of demand for electricity to run pumps, etc.? Yes. Like that slide earlier where Jess was talking about natural gas usage and stuff, that was part of that equation. And if you have not talked to Don Johansson about water use or energy demand, he is the man to talk to. He has amazing spreadsheets that he's been able to calculate all of this stuff out on. I assume some of those numbers could potentially change with these reroutes that may or may not happen, just because they're probably going to have to move some of their pump stations. And I mean, I know like South Dakota, for example, they had like six, nine pump stations. It was a lot. I can't remember off the top of my head at one point. And like, if they're not going through South Dakota, that's going to change things. So yes, those numbers exist, but they seem to be constantly changing. Um, let's see. Do Going into the Q&A questions. Um,
Got quite a few in there. You want me to read one?
well, we answered that one.
When do
Um,
the tax credits expire?
so it depends on the tax credit. So for the 45Q tax credits, those are good for 12 years. They can claim them from 12 years, and then donezo. But with 45Z, that tax credit expires at this point in time in 2029. By my calculations, 45Z is actually more lucrative for especially the ethanol plants. But there's uncertainty on whether or not it will exist after 2029. Like there's, obviously I'm sure probably lobbying going on in Congress to extend the deadline for that tax credit for, far beyond 2029. And I would not be surprised if that passed. But at this point, 45Z expires in 2029, December 31st, I think. And then 45Q, 12 years after you start claiming it.
There's one good question on the elections I want to jump to. If 80% of Iowans are against eminent domain for this private project, how did the pro-pipeline incumbents win their primaries? That is a really good question. It's that we need to grow. We need to expand the number of people who are voting on this issue. We did have some, really exciting things happen even in some of those races that we didn't win. For example, Senator Sweeney, who is someone that is, not been on our side for a long time. Her level of support dropped by 19% in this last election, and that is because there was a candidate running against her on property rights. We didn't have enough to actually get that other candidate in office, but it shows that she's got a struggle in her district. We also increased voter turnout in some key areas where the pipeline is very controversial. So there were a lot of good things that happened in the primary election, but it just shows we need to ramp up. If we want to truly build a Senate that is going to pass this bill, and if we want to have a governor that's going to sign the bill and not veto it, we have to get serious about these elections and talking to these candidates, letting them know this is what we want. Are you going to be the candidate to do it? And then voting, despite party, on the people who say yes. And then we can make sure that we have a Senate that's listening to us and not listening to Summit.
Um, Really quick, I want to back up to Kathy was asking, doesn't 45Q expire in 2033? My understanding, and I am not a expert by any means, but my understanding is that you have to have your facility like built and operating by 2033, and you can still then, 12 years past that point, claim the tax credits. So if you built it in, 2030, you wouldn't just get 3 years, you would still get 12 years. But like new facilities wouldn't be able to start claiming them. But again, we've seen that date change a couple of times, same with 45Z. So my, best guess is that 2033 is going to be extended just like 2029 is.
And it does say construction just has to be started by 2033.
Um, any updates on route across Nebraska to Wyoming? Just you want to let me share screen for a second and I can share my best guess map. Now, do not take this with any official, take it with a grain of salt because this is just what I'm kind of thinking could be an option. But let me see if I can get it pulled up here. Basically, if they were to go through Nebraska, there's a couple issues that they have to face, right? So, one, the sandhills. Trying to get around the sandhills, I think, will be difficult. They would not just go through it. So, my best guess, this is the Summit pipeline proposed right here in Nebraska. My best guess is this pink line that they'd go down more south, kind of like following the tall grass pipeline and then wind up in Wyoming that way. But again, there's no like real evidence of this. This is just my gut instinct and how I would do it if I was building a pipeline, but I'm not. So we'll see. And again, like we don't really know if Wyoming is the final end destination. I think everybody in Nebraska should be prepared for that. They need to be talking to their counties. Their counties need to be passing ordinances, all of that good stuff. But we'll see.
Really quick question. Someone's asking if we can send instructions to be able to submit comments to the IUC. Yes, we will send that out. So if you fill out that pledge, then we know for sure we can stay in contact with you. It's not as simple as other state agencies, but yes, we will send out instructions to submit an objection.
I see one more. I know we're over time here, but who regulates CO2 pipelines? Is it industry dominated when rules are written? Great question. Technically, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration helps to regulate CO2 pipelines, but those regulations are pretty slim. There's really not a whole lot of them, and yeah, like if you look at who is in charge of the agency right now, yeah, it's pipeline people, and it typically always has been. And so, in fact, like m most of the pipeline safety laws are, taken from the American Petroleum Institute. Like they just adopt whatever API says. So yeah, it's if you're looking for, real measurable regulations that have, been taken with input from people impacted by pipelines, it's not happening. Not right now,
Just
anyways.
to add on to that really quick, that was something we heavily engaged with for a few years with PHMSA. Under the previous administration, some of the staff were more willing to work with us. They held a big meeting in Iowa, and then we sent folks out to DC. We're working with an organization called Pipeline Safety Trust, who are more of the experts on the nitty-gritty details of how a pipeline's designed and maintained and operated. And we got really close to having some really strong, good draft rules introduced at the federal level. And then with the change in administration, all of the pending rules got cut from PHMSA, including ours. And so we have no good regulations in the books.
All right, last question. Um, what would be a sign if Summit officially dropped those routes that they're talking about dropping? When might we know? When can I not worry anymore? That sort of thing. Um,
Like Emma said, I think you should always worry until Summit withdraws its application completely, and then you should still probably worry for another year or two just in case they reapply. But the triggers that will tell you that Summit is starting to take action on those 200 miles that they say they're dropping is when we start seeing action in the docket where they're formally saying we're withdrawing these tracts of land or these parcels of land from Exhibit H. And then there'll probably be some sort of formal form letter that comes with it that says we're formally dropping these sections of route. But until your specific parcel has been withdrawn on the docket, you still have the threat of eminent domain hanging over your head.
and frankly, even after that, as long as this pipeline is still being proposed, who knows what could happen in the future. So I think, yeah, that's why it's best to stay in touch, join these webinars, weekly meetings, join the Iowa easement team, things like that, just so you know this is what's happening. And trust me, you will probably hear my sigh of relief when Summit finally announces that they're done for good all the way in California because it will be very obvious.
Yep, we'll be having a big old party if they when that happens. Not if, but when that happens.
Oh, I see Joan has her hand raised.
We might need to unmute her. Allowed to talk
There
to
you
her.
go.
Joan, you can unmute yourself.
Maybe not. All right.
No.
Well, like we said earlier, you are all always welcome to give us a phone call, send us an email, and we will gladly get back to you with any other questions. But I think that's probably it for tonight.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Spread the word. It's going to take all of us to protect our state from carbon pipelines. Have a nice
Amazing. All
night.
right. Thank you all.
Bye bye.